Well, welcome back to another episode of the Reality Halfway House. Today we're going to be talking about time traveling with John Tesh. Are we living in a simulation? And is there a big event coming our way? We are caught between worlds. This is the Reality Halfway House. I'm your host, Jones Nelson. Well, good day to you. Gosh, it's been a crazy week since the last time that we spoke. Last week we were talking about the Schumann resonance. What is it? What impact does it have on our life? And I've seen many different talking points on that throughout the week. Apparently, the Schumann resonance has been off the charts as the world continues to get weirder and weirder by the day. Again, like I said, we keep coming back to this point of we are caught between these two worlds, this kind of old world that was quote unquote seemingly normal. And then you have like this post-COVID world where things just seem to be getting weirder and weirder and weirder. Now, see, I'm a millennial. And, it's like I remember a time back in the 90s, kind of growing up in the 90s where it's, kind of pre-internet or internet was just starting to kind of come up on board. And, time just felt different. There were times, growing up where it's just like you were just bored. You would have nothing to do, and it's, your parents would send you outside and say, go find something to do because you just were bored. And sometimes, well, my family, they threaten me. It's like, if you don't have something to do, I'll find something for you to do. So that was my cue to get outside and touch grass, as the kids say these days. But I think most of us can agree in 2026 that time doesn't feel the same as it did before. It has a different texture to it. It has a different speed to it. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today in terms of what time looks like today versus, kind of what it was before. And the thing is, here we are. Today is May 31st, 2026. And, we're coming up on the 1st of June. We already are halfway through the year of 26, and it's like it just started. And it's not just me. Anybody that I encounter on a day-to-day basis, it says the same thing. I can't believe this year is halfway over. And more people seem to be coming to the same conclusion that time itself feels like it's speeding up. Now, I went to Reddit to just kind of, get a gauge for what the Redditors are out there saying about it. And this is according to the simulation thread. They said, I've been told it could simply be down to age, which everybody says time moves faster as you get older. And they come to the same conclusion that time moves faster the older you get, seeing as each year that goes by becomes a lower percentage of your life in total. I can't prove it, of course, and I've never been this age before, but it feels that it's not age or not related to age. Lately, since the start of 2025, it's felt really fast. Weeks felt like 3 or 4 days max, and the months seemed to blur together. Two theories that I've come across: time dilation and the simulation hypothesis. Time may not flow the same for everyone, so we're all getting a different experience depending on the system's resources or the way it's rendered. Number 2, relativity and subjective time perception. Time moves differently depending on the speed and gravity around you. And then they go on to ask if anybody else is feeling the same way. As I've said, my feed, my For You page and my reels and everything else, my algorithm keeps sending me things that corroborate this notion that time, in fact, is speeding up. Now, the thing is, when I look back at the 90s, we didn't have the same level of distractions that we have today. We had a different relationship with time. I was just listening to a podcast earlier today on my way home from work, and what was interesting is they said, there's this possibility of this big event, which we'll get to later coming, that ultimately may go through and change the way that we relate with time yet again, and perhaps in a way that has never been done before. But in the 90s, for example, if you wanted to watch something on TV, for example, that a lot of people can't relate with today, especially kids that are born, after, streaming and so forth has been prevalent, you had to wait for a TV show to come on. or if there was, a ball game or the president was on or fill in the blank, your programming could be interrupted. There was no on demand, or at least not as readily available as it is today. There was still pay-per-view and other things like that. But for the most part, you didn't have access to this level of streaming that we do today. It just was almost non-existent. So you had to set your schedule, your calendar around this notion of time. The same was true with events, and like we actually physically wrote things down on our calendars. And I mean, our whole relationship and the way that we moved about our days, weeks, months, years was a lot different. Today, we're caught up in a 24-hour news cycle. So you're constantly bombarded with news from around the world, and you never get a break from it. So I think there is validity to this notion that time in and of itself is feels faster than it actually does, because we never shut down. Again, back in the 90s, and again I keep coming back to the 90s because again I'm a millennial kid born in the 80s, kind of grew up in the 90s kind of a thing. We got news twice a day. Or a few times a day, 5 and 10 or 5 and 11. And every time we get those news, they maybe give you snippets around the world, but for the most part, it was your local news, and they give you an idea of what's happening in your neighborhood, your neck of the woods. Now we get news from around the world, and we're constantly inundated by this ongoing stress of wars in the Middle East or wars in China, famines, droughts, fires, et cetera, and we're constantly caught in this hyper-stressed, excited mode, and our nervous systems never get an opportunity to shut down. So one of the things that I think about, and one of the things I theorize when I just personally try to delve into this concept is it our nervous systems that are actually going through and causing this time dilution, as they say? Are we experiencing time differently than each other? In other words, mutually exclusive to the person next to you. Because your week may be taking forever. I often joke on my radio show, it's like, gosh, it's Tuesday, and it already feels like it's been 2 weeks, by this Tuesday. And at the end of the day, there are weeks that feel like that, and there are weeks that feel like they fly by. My oldest is 16, and I have my Facebook, memories pop up of, 12 years ago, and it doesn't feel like it should have been that amount of time. It's very interesting. I think a lot of it has to do with this notion of stimulation and overload. Now, I could be wrong. So having worked in radio as long as I have, I will say this: the great John Tesh. For those of you who don't know him, he's been on the radio for decades now. He's a musician. I often joke on my radio show that I have a radio crush on John Tesh because his voice is just so sultry and magnificent. But one of the things that he does in his radio show, and I've been interacting with that show on radio stations for the last almost 30 years, he offers something called Intelligence for Your Life. And I forget when it was, maybe a couple of years ago, that he was talking about the relationship with time and how the experiences that we have, the interactions we have with our phones, devices, the internets, etc., help to go through and to kind of warp time or our perception of it. And so I reached out to the Google AI to just kind of give an idea of what that episode was about or what his perception. And it says, according to Google AI, it's to slow down time. John Tesh recommends breaking out of autopilot by intentionally planning ahead, minimizing rushing, and actively forcing your brain to process new experiences. Again, that kind of harkens back to what I was just saying about our nervous system being overloaded because we're pulled in so many different directions. We don't focus anymore because our attention spans have broken down. Here's Tesh's core strategy to stretch your perception of time. He says, embrace new experiences. Routine makes time fly. Actively seek out novel activities, learn new skills, and travel. Your brain creates denser memories for new experience, making the period feel longer in hindsight. Practice mindfulness, he says. Step back from chronic busyness by scheduling intentional, unstructured time to, quote, be still or read. He goes on to say, optimize your focus, prevent time-wasting distractions by using time blocking and the Pomodoro method, if I'm saying that correctly, e.g. using a timer to stay intensely on task for 23 minutes. I'm not sure why 20 minutes or 23 minutes. This keeps your day predictable and stops tasks from expanding to fill your whole schedule. He says prioritizing rest and sleep. Avoid wearing a busy schedule as a badge of honor. He goes on to emphasize that consistent 7 to 8 hour sleep schedules and designated recovery periods are vital to prevent chronic stress, which distorts how we process days and weeks. So there you go. You can also go to John Tesh's official website. I'll link to all this in the show notes as well. But that's part of his Intelligence for Your Life series. And I just remember thinking about that at the time, and it went kind of in one ear and out the other, I guess, in the ear long enough for me to at least retain the memory of it. But I think there's such validity to that, because at the end of the day, we don't take time to rest anymore. We're under chronic stress because we're moving from one project to the next, or in 2026, from one job to the next. And we seldom have time to just sit and reflect. Remember I said back in the 90s, we had opportunities to be bored, right? And it's in those times of doing nothing, you're resting. You're allowing your nervous system to regain some of that plasticity because it's not focused. Now when you sit down, you have your cell phone in your hand or your tablet or your computer. There is no sitting down with nothing anymore. You know, it's funny. They say when you go to the bathroom and you forget your phone, you know, you have to engage in some of the 90s activities. You have to read the shampoo bottle. You know, we didn't have time to go through and focus on other things at such volumes back then as we do now. You know, we had magazines and books and other things like that we would engage our time with, but we didn't. It was in one spot. It didn't go by at warp speed. Now we doom scroll continually, and we never stop. I find myself in that mix as well, and I find myself craving, you know, I like slower pace. I threaten at least 5 times a week that I'm going to get rid of my iPhone and I'm going to go back to a flip phone. And yet, my life is so ingrained and attached to that thing that I can't, even if I wanted to give it up. The last job that I had 3 applications, 3 apps on my phone that I had to use daily in order to be able to even log in and do the job. So at what point do we as human beings kind of reclaim our lives? Have our lives completely gone out the window to the point to where we've lost control of the very thing that is the most important to us? Our time. You know, the joke is, or the old saying goes, you know, we only get so many trips around the sun. You know, you only get so many years, and no man is promised tomorrow. None of us are. That's the thing. You could drop dead in your sleep. You could drop dead today. Nobody is given the opportunity to know what tomorrow brings. And on the one hand, that's scary, and on the other hand, it's exciting. I think it's a gift, deep down, a God-given gift, not knowing what's coming next. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but the Bible says, you know, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. That's in Proverbs, and I'm paraphrasing that. You know, you can sit out there and you can plan your whole life out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go the way you think. And the more distracted that we are in our doom scrolling and just never disconnecting from the internet, the faster that time moves. How many times have you sat down, I'm just going to sit here for 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of, catch up on Facebook, and the next thing you know, it's been 2 hours. It was a relative 2 hours, but you got sucked into the flow of it. And the thing is, since, the mid-90s when the internet kicked on, we logged on, and at one point we never logged off. Back in the 90s to connect, you had to log in via the phone, and it was kind of a production. And half the time it wouldn't even connect. You get that god-awful fax machine sound effect. And, like I said, only about half the time it would connect the first shot. And then somebody would pick up the phone and disconnect you. It was very sketchy. And when you were done on the internet, you would disconnect because literally nobody could use the phone while you were on. But at some point in the early 2000s, early 2000s, mid 20s, we connected to the internet and never disconnected. And I think at that point is when we can kind of trace back this time speeding up. And the thing is, it's like I find myself homesick, missing those older days where I was disconnected from all of that. Being my age, my early 40s now, it's like I went through my college years without camera phones and other things, or they were in their infancy at that point. So, I mean, I was able to exist and grow up without just a constant video camera in my face. Which I was never a super wild child, but it's definitely nice to know that there is some anonymity for some of those early years of my life. But today, you have an entire group of people that are shaped by the fact that they always have a camera in their face. You see timidity. You see people that are shy, that don't want to talk to people. I just here recently, I seeing AI coming for the jobs. I've spent almost 20 years, working in the finance industry. And I saw AI coming for our jobs because, AI is still kind of stupid, but it's getting smarter by the day. But AI does math really well, right? And so I saw the writing on the wall because they use AI in virtually every aspect of their job. And I was going to wake up one morning and, 30 to 50% of the workforce was going to be gone. I just knew it. So I took a step and took a leap. And I got out of that industry about a month ago and started something completely different. Completely different. I went from white collar to blue collar because I figured, AI is going to have a hard time being able to, build physical infrastructure. So I got into construction. Never worked in construction before. Remember, my degree is in finance. I have over 20 years experience in, the financial industry. So I jumped so far outside of my comfort zone, I can't even see the edge of it anymore. And the one thing I've noticed over the last month in working with kids half my age is that so many of them are so short-sighted. They don't see beyond the next paycheck because they've always had a phone. They're very timid in the way that they move around because there's always a camera in their face. They don't look beyond next payday. Partially because of where the economy is. I mean, people can't hardly save anymore. But they don't look beyond that point because it's never been an option. It breaks my heart. But the one thing I will say from this experience of getting outside of my comfort zone, not because I necessarily wanted to, still I'm not super thrilled about the environment, but I've embraced an entirely new experience by doing this. And coming back to John Tesh's, advice on how to slow down time, he said, embrace new experiences. Routine makes time fly. Actively seek out novel activities, learn new skills, and travel. Your brain creates denser memories for new experiences, making the period feel longer in hindsight. I got outside my comfort zone. I embraced a new experience. I embraced a new career. And in doing so, I have completely shaken up my snow globe. I have etch-a-sketched, for those of you who know what that is. I've etch-a-sketched my life to the point to where I'm starting to see time differently. An 8-hour day behind a computer feels completely different than an 8-hour day on a job site. Completely different. The other aspect of that is this. I've been in radio for almost 30 years. I've been behind a microphone since I was 15 years old. I've been in the studio. I'm in my recording studio right now, and I've been saying for years, I'm going to start a podcast. I need to start a podcast. In my second week on the job, out of nowhere, one of the new hires on the job site came up to me and said, you said that, he's like, would you like to buy this podcast equipment that I have? He said, I think you should start a podcast. and the wild part about this is that experience came completely unsolicited. And somehow, after probably dozens of attempts over the last decade or so to start a podcast, I finally found the drive to do it. I'm standing here or sitting here before you, with a completely new perspective than I had before. And I wouldn't have had that perspective had I not stepped outside that comfort zone. But the act of actually stepping out has certainly changed my perspective of time. This whole week, on the job site, they're a little bit behind on their scheduling and so forth. And so they gave us this last Monday off for Memorial Day. But then we had to pay for it by having 5 10-hour shifts. Next week, we've got 6 10-hour shifts. And the 10-hour shifts feel like they take 25 hours. I mean, it's one of those things. But I also work at the radio station, and I also work this podcast, and I also have, my music, I'm releasing music and songs and so forth. And so, I go from one job to the next, and there's very little time to disconnect. It just goes from one. I woke up this morning on day 7 of having to go to a job and had to leave to the radio station to go do, part of my radio show. And I'm just in pure and total exhaustion. I haven't been this exhausted in so long. And my For You page, my reels, my algorithm keeps sending me things about how people are just absolutely at the brink of just utter exhaustion and despondency. Because everything is so expensive and everything has gotten so much harder in 2026 that people don't have the luxury to stop. I got home from work last night and I was so exhausted. So exhausted because especially, construction versus, sitting at a computer all day is so physically demanding. By the time I got home, I almost didn't have enough energy to even eat anything. I was almost just ready to just go home and go to bed. Just pure exhaustion. And yet the next day on a Sunday, I had to get up and go to the radio station to work as well. We never have the opportunity to, as John Tesh says, prioritize rest and sleep. We don't get it. Sleep is a luxury. Rest is a luxury. And that's just to be able to maintain status quo. Everything has gotten so expensive that we're pulled into this. So what's my point with all of this? Well, I think at the end of the day, the time as we experience it really is a side effect, or our experience, I guess, of time is a side effect of the circumstances that we have found ourselves in. You know, back in the 90s, we weren't connected. Today, we're connected all the time. You know, back in the 90s, we had the luxury of being bored, right? We didn't have this just smorgasbord of information. We didn't have streaming or on-demand video games or fill in the blank. We had to come up with different things to help bide our time because we just didn't have the same luxuries. We didn't have a cell phone in our pocket that connected us to the world. We were, for all intents and purposes, disconnected. So we had better sleep. We had the opportunity to rest. And every day was an opportunity to embrace new experiences because boredom really is the father or the mother of all invention. You know, you get creative when you get bored. You come up with new ideas when you get bored. It's a great opportunity to be able to do that. And we don't have that today. Couple that with the fact that inflation is at an all-time high. They say it's at 10, 11%, but we all know that that's not the case. We all know that it's getting more and more expensive every single day. You know, you've got talk of aliens in the news, and you've got the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and we're ultimately taxed mentally, physically, in every aspect of our life. You know, our nervous system doesn't ever have a chance to stop. You know, John Tesh says 7 to 8 hours of sleep schedules are designated recovery periods are vital to prevent chronic stress, which distorts how we process days and weeks. Well, we never get an opportunity to shut down. We're always connected. Like I said, at some point in the early 2000s, we got on the internet and never got off. We connected and never disconnected. And so as a result, our nervous system never has the opportunity to be able to, get out of fight or flight. We're always in it. We're always on. We never have the opportunity to turn off. And that changes the way that we function and we perceive time. You know, it's funny too, as we move forward in our technology and advancement, there's a lot going on, I think, behind the scenes than what any of us even realize too. I came across this post, and again, I'll share all of these in the show notes, so you can link over there. But a lot of people kind of getting, and this could fall into the category of the tinfoil hat. However, the source that this individual is using is Cern themselves, the Large Hadron Collider Facts and Myths, according to the Cern, as he states, at Cern press office. This is Hashim Al-Ghali. He says, yes, seriously, while CERN scientists hunt for the building blocks of the universe, online theorists claim the Large Hadron Collider has already rewritten our reality. Since its activation, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN has been at the center of a digital firestorm involving claims that it has fractured our timeline. These theories often point to the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where large groups of people share false memories of historical events as proof that high energy experiments have merged our world with a parallel universe. From the supposed 2012 reality shift to rumors of portals being opened to other dimensions, these claims have flourished in online communities, often fueled by a mix of genuine scientific curiosity and viral misinformation. It's funny because on the one hand, you instantly want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, oh, it's all hocus pocus. It's all science fiction. But in the wise words of Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, they were so preoccupied on whether or not they could, they didn't ever stop to ask if they should, right? I'm paraphrasing that. But see, as we go through and are delving into these deeper topics, is it possible? Is it possible? And I think we need to ask ourselves these questions. It's not one of those things where it's science fiction any longer. I think we need to ask these questions as our technology increases. Are we affecting or tampering the fabric of the world that we're in? Elon Musk said, and I saw this earlier this week. I've heard it before, but I saw it earlier this week. He said this, some crazy statistic. He's like, the notion or the idea or the probability that we are in base reality, meaning we're in the source, the very fundamental form of reality, is like in the billions of a percentage that we're actually in base reality, meaning that we are in some iteration of that reality. And if I'm understanding him correctly, and I'm not claiming that I am, that would suggest that we are in some form of a simulation. I don't know what to make of that. According to that logic, if you've ever seen the show Star Trek, we're in some form of a holodeck. Any one of us, at any point, are walking through this holodeck or this matrix or this fake reality in some meat suit. They've said for a long time that our consciousness exists outside the body. I saw a video, actually, I was going to share it today. I'm not sure that I will be able to find it, but I saw a video earlier this week. I'll find it and link to it in the show notes because I do have the link for it. It's really interesting. The guy was talking about different dimensions, and he said there were 7 or 9 dimensions. One of them, the third density, is purportedly, according to his video, and again, I'll link to it in the show notes, the event, or this third dimensional reality, is only one dimension. You've got another dimension that is for your dreams. So when you go and you dream at night, you're literally leaving this dimension and going into another dimension. And then you've got heaven and da-da-da. What he was basically attributing it to is, as they talk about the 7 layers of heaven, or this, that there are different versions or different dimensions. And purportedly, what they're saying, especially with Cern, is that they're trying to go through, in addition to, as they say, try to uncover the building blocks of the universe, that they may be intentionally or unintentionally getting into these different layers of dimensions. The article goes on to say, physicists clarify that while they do investigate the possibility of extra dimensions to better understand the laws of nature, these experiments are a far cry from the reality-bending events described in popular myths. The high-energy collisions performed at the Large Hadron Collider, designed to observe subatomic particles, not to tear the fabric of space-time or alter historical records, i.e. the Mandela effect. Despite the persistent allure of these conspiracy theories, there is no empirical evidence to suggest that our reality has been compromised, highlighting the growing gap between complex scientific research and its public interpretation. So they're saying, okay, we're trying not to go we're trying to go through and understand the foundations or the building blocks of the universe, but there's really no empirical evidence to suggest that our reality has been compromised. And yet I would submit to you, empirical or not, that we are seeing different things in this universe. We feel that time is speeding up. Now, could that be just tied to our attention, just like what we were talking about, or is there something different with that? I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I do remember things differently than what they are today. Some of these Mandela effects, the big one for me was Ed McMahon and Publishers Clearinghouse. I've seen quote unquote empirical evidence that he absolutely was a part of it, and I remember him. And yet he came out and said, "Oh, I had nothing to do with it. It was a different company. I don't even remember what it was." I mean, and that's one example. There's so many different Fruit of the Loom and the cornucopia, yada yada yada. There's a bunch of them. So where are those coming from? Does it come from this? I don't know. Is it and if it's able to do that, is it going through and changing time as well? There's so many different what ifs, and you can say, well, oh, Jones, your tinfoil hat is on just a little too tight. And I think it's important for us to ask these questions. Remember, again, I was in finance for 20 years, and in finance, 1 + 1 = 2. It has to, every time, because if it doesn't, the entire grid or the platform on which finance stands falls into this disarray. So everything has to add up. And so that's after 2 decades or over 2 decades in that business, it's like I have to think about things. It's like, okay, well, I mean, I've got this and this, but there's still this variable that is not allowing me to add things up to where they should be. It's like, okay, there's no quote unquote empirical evidence that they're changing time or that they're changing, what do they say, space time or historical records. And yet we have these weird things like Mandela effects or just feeling like time is going faster. Like I said, tomorrow is June 1st, 2026. Half this year is over, and it feels as though it just started. It's really weird. It's really weird. And the thing is, as we move forward in 2026 and beyond, it just feels as though, and I keep seeing this over and over on my reels. I've saved several of them. I'll add some of these to the show notes so you can go through and see. But people are saying over and over that they feel some sort of an event coming. We heard from Dolores Cannon last week talking about this division in dimensions. She said the Earth is splitting apart into 2. Well, what did we just hear about with Cern? They're saying, well, there's no empirical evidence that they're doing any of this. And yet, Dolores Cannon has said that's what's happening. And it's not just her. If you listen to the podcast Mysterious Universe, which I have for over a decade, they talk about this concept over and over and over. I used to think that stuff was just completely bogus and just for pure entertainment. But they say truth is stranger than fiction. And as we're moving through time, we're starting to see that there are things that we thought existed or things that we didn't think existed that do. Again, the government has told us for years and years that aliens don't exist or the extraterrestrial life. It was all fake. And if you believed in that you had lost the plot, that you were crazy. And now, in 2026, they're coming out and saying, well, actually, there are aliens. And on Fox News the other day, they said there are 4 different species of aliens that we know about. So are you going to come back and apologize, for everyone that you called crazy over the years? Do you see how this unravels? Do you see how this erodes at the credibility of the people that have told you forever that you were crazy, how can I go through then and fully take at face value what these physicists are saying? I'm not saying that they're wrong, but we've also been told aliens aren't real. But now we're telling, well, actually, they were, and they've been here for a long time. It does feel like an event is coming. I don't know what that event is. If we are in some kind of a simulation, and I'm not saying we are, but let's say for the sake of this argument, if we are in some sort of a simulation, what does that mean? Does that mean that some God, the God, aliens outside of the simulation is just going to pop the cartridge out, stop this video game? Are they going to put another cartridge in, another disc in? Do we cease to exist? There's so many different questions, and there's so many different theories flying around the internet about what this might be. But the big thing that I think that we can come to terms with is that, yeah, something weird is brewing. It gets weirder by the day. I cannot believe just the things that are coming out of the White House, the White House website or their social media feed. It's bizarre. It's like something off of a Twilight Zone episode. Absolutely insane. And for years they told us we were crazy. Oh, it's just all X-Files. You can't think about that kind of stuff. Art Bell and Coast to Coast, George Norrie. I mean, they're all nuts. And yet now they're coming back and saying, think about this. George Norrie and Art Bell need an apology. This is absolutely bananas to me. Absolutely bananas, the world that we're living in. And as things get weirder, time does seems like there's a correlation between time speeding up. And then actually, I wasn't going to do this, but let me pull this up. Hold on. I'm pulling this up as we speak. In the Bible, it actually talks about this. In Matthew 24, which is an epic chapter if you've never read it. It's Matthew 24:22. It says, "And unless those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved." Or there should no flesh be saved. Let me just read that again. It says, "Unless those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." So the Bible itself in Matthew 24 is a chapter that goes into kind of the end times, if you've never read it. Highly recommended if you haven't. So the Bible itself says that the days will be shortened. It's going to happen. So what is that event? What is the event? Well, I never used to be into prophecy. I used to never follow any of that stuff. I always thought that, anything in the... I went to church and was I played in the praise band. I actually almost went into seminary years ago. When I was in high school, I used to write sermons for our youth group and deliver them. I grew up in a very traditional environment to where you didn't expect miracles. Miracles had already happened. You didn't look for opportunities to deviate from what was said in the pulpit. But when you read the Bible and you get into it, and I've read it cover to cover several times, That doesn't make me a theologian. It doesn't make me an expert. But what it does do is it gives you a new perspective. It gives you a new perspective on what to expect when you go to church. It gives you a new perspective on life in general. Because I can tell you that church has this weird perception that I just need to sit tight and just wait for Jesus to come back. I don't need to be too aggressive. I don't need to be too involved in the day-to-day. I just need to hang tight. And I just don't think that speaks to what Jesus would actually say. I think Jesus said, as a matter of fact, let me pull it up here real quick. He said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Matthew 10:34-36. He says, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have come not to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. I think so many people are sitting there waiting for this like super benevolent Jesus to come and save them. And so they will not get engaged in life. And as we have this impending event coming, the church remains passive. See, they don't preach stuff like this from the pulpit. It's all about the Sermon on the Mount. You know, love your neighbors as you love yourself. John 3:16. But they don't talk about this. And I think that if there is a big event coming, and the prophets, and there are many prophets out that have said and are saying that there is a, quote, great and terrible day coming, which is out of the book of Joel. And the signs are in the heavens, and they have been. We've been having multiple signs in the heavens. As a matter of fact, there's a gentleman by the name of Bo Ponley that said today, May 31st, could actually be the kickoff. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and there's an economist, and I can't remember his name. I'll put it in the show notes. But he has created a program and an algorithm that has been running for the past 40 years. 40 years! Back in the 80s, he started this. He said it was one of the first versions of AI actually to be invented. Well, that's interesting. AI just came out a couple of years ago. But it has been running to something to the effect of around 98% accuracy with respect to its predictions, saying that all hell is about to break loose beginning in June. That's tomorrow. Building to what? This coming event. See, not only are the prophets speaking of this coming event, but you also have regular people that are hearing from God, or at least they say they're hearing from God. Oh, I hear from somebody, and this is what God says, and God told me this, and God's saying, prepare yourselves, and God's saying, we've got this coming, and God's saying, where have we heard that? Where have we heard that before? In Joel 2:28, again, as he talks about the great and terrible day of the Lord, and afterwards I will pour out my spirit on all the people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. It says it right there. Again, I'm a finance guy. Degrees in finance, 20 years in Wall Street. And I'm seeing these things unfold, and it's making the scripture come to life. So what's coming? What is it? Came across a video, and I thought this was interesting because this dovetails nicely with what we were talking about last week with Dolores Cannon. And I just wanted to play a little bit of this for you. I'll play the audio. This is Justin Fuse, if I'm saying that right. That's Justin FVZE. I'll link to his video in the show notes. But I thought this was interesting because he talks about and he articulates what a lot of us, I think, are hearing and seeing on the internet. So there you go. There is this weird correlation to where he's speaking of this upcoming event where people are going to be left behind. What does that even mean? What's that look like? I can't, I feel it. I feel like there's some event coming and I don't know what to make of it. Again, this whole notion of the reality halfway house and this podcast and everything is that we are caught between these two worlds, the before and the after. And we're in this weird purgatory where we're stuck here. We're stuck here waiting to be let out and back into what's next. You go to prison for a crime that you committed, and then you go to a halfway house so that you can be prepared and acclimated to what's coming next. We've been caught in some weird prison, and now we're being acclimated into what's coming next. Our reality is fixing to change. And in a way, I don't know, right? I don't know what the next iteration looks like. I can't tell you that. I wish I could. If I knew, I would. But what does that look like? So, like he said, some people are going to be left behind, and we can't worry about it. I wrote a song last year for one of the projects that I'm in. It's called, the band or the project is called Before the Apple, and the song is called Vultures Get Ready. And it's based out of Revelation 19, where it talks about how there is this great event at the end of time. And it says, an angel stands in the sun and shouts to all the birds flying high to gather together for a great banquet that God has prepared. And one of the versions of the Bible, I think it's the New Standard Version, if I'm remembering correctly, it says, vultures get ready, for tonight you will feast on kings. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along those lines. And so that was the emphasis for the song. And for people that are not willing to accept the fact that we are moving into something, that time is speeding up, that we are moving at warp speed directly into some big event that's coming. Unfortunately, we can't worry about them anymore. And it breaks my heart. I'm working on another song right now that hopefully will end up coming out in the month of June, called Rejected Silver, based out of the book of Jeremiah. And it's talking about the Israelites and the tribe of Judah and how they went astray and were worshiping other gods. And the verse effectively goes through and says, don't let yourself become rejected silver. Don't let the silversmith reject you because you keep going about and doing your other things. The whole song is written from the perspective of singing to this group of people. The Bible says in Matthew 24, coming back to kind of the book of the end time, the chapter of the end times there, 24:40, it says, "Then shall two be in the field, and one shall be taken and the other left." Like he said, there will be a separation. I talked about last week where it talks about the parable of the wheat and the tares, where the tares shall be taken and the wheat shall be left and gathered and harvested in the barn. The tares shall be burned. Also talks about the sheep and the goats. The prophets have been talking about this reverse rapture, this notion that the evil shall be taken and the meek, as the Bible says, shall inherit the earth. What does that mean? Billy Graham really went through and preached this notion of the rapture and that Jesus is going to come and rapture away his bride. And if you try to dispel any of that or to suggest other notion of that, the church as it stands today goes wild. Goes absolutely wild. But if the meek is intended to inherit the earth, and if Jesus himself said, hey, listen, the tares were seeded or sown into the farmer's crop by the enemy. He says the harvesters, who are the angels, will come and harvest up the tares once they've been allowed to grow with the wheat, prior to the wheat being taken. So let me get this straight. The wheat is not taken first. The tares or the weeds are taken first. And the wheat is left. It sounds like the possibility of there being a reverse rapture is actually not too far-fetched. And the prophets are discussing this ad nauseum. I came to that conclusion actually a few years prior to even hearing a prophecy on it, because of the parable of the wheat and the tares, and with everything going on in the world. And I know I may catch hate in the comments. Well, you just don't know. You just don't know, Jones. Jesus is coming to save us. We just need to sit here and wait for him. Jesus wasn't a sit and wait kind of a guy, though. He really was a man of action. So this idea of sitting around and just waiting for him to come and to rescue, even though he said, I didn't come to do that. He said, I came to shake things up, right? Remember, I came with a sword, not to bring peace. I don't know. We're heading at warp speed as time seemingly is moving faster and faster every day. I think that we are in for something in the coming days, and unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, let me retract that. I think that we are heading quickly into times that we have no words for. Some of the prophets that I've listened to have said that God is going to move in a way that he's never moved before, tantamount to the Red Sea. If we're moving from one reality, which is one of slavery, to one of freedom, as the Israelites moved from one of slavery to one of freedom, there has to be a divide. There has to be a breakdown. There has to be a period of time to where you have to transition one from the other. If you're scuba diving and you come up too quick, you get the bends. The Israelites had that time. It was called the desert, and they wandered for 40 years. Right now, we're in a period of chaos and craziness. We're in the reality halfway house.